All right, here we go. Today's lecture is going to be chapter 5. And again, just some more housekeeping things to remember for the week. This week is going to be your first lecture exam on chapters 1 through 4. So make sure that you have been using your review sheet and are ready to go on that. That will be due on Sunday at 11:59 p.m. with the rest of your weekly assignments for week 5. We are going to continue our discussion on specific macronutrients. This week's chapter, chapter 5, is on fats, oils, and other lipids. So let's describe what our fats are and talk about why we need them. Lipids are basically just a group of molecules that are organic, which means they contain carbon. They also contain hydrogen and oxygen. And the big thing about anything that is considered a lipid is that it is hydrophobic, which literally means water fearing. So it has a phobia of water. It's afraid of water. Or it doesn't mix. So we know that, oil and water don't mix. We know that old adage, oil and water don't mix. And the reason for that is that lipids are hydrophobic. They're not attracted to water. They're afraid of water and they don't mix with water. Structure-wise, some of them are kind of similar to each other, but the one thing that makes a lipid is that it does not mix with water. Fat is a common name for a certain type of lipid, a triglyceride, which we'll talk about the structure of that later on, but it's kind of the most common source of fat in our food is going to come from triglycerides. So what is fat as far as, what do we use it for in food? Well, it helps us make delicious flaky baked goods. So if you've ever had, a croissant or something like that, the way the pastry is so flaky and has all those little layers to it is because of all the fat they put, all the butter, which has a lot of fat in it, that they put in the dough when they're making it. The fat in your animal-based protein, your meat products, makes it more tender, makes it easier to eat and sort of softer to chew. It provides flavor. Fatty stuff tastes good and it smells good when fatty things are baking or cooking. And as far as your diet is concerned, it's one of those things that it's slower to digest in our digestive system, which makes us feel fuller longer. So it contributes to satiety. As far as what they do in the body, number one, the most important, the biggest thing that lipids do or fats do in the body is that they are our major long-term energy storage. We talked about carbohydrates last week, and we know that we can store a little bit of carbohydrate in the form of glycogen in our liver and in our skeletal muscles, but that's a fairly quickly used up source of energy, and it doesn't pack the punch that fats do because carbohydrates only give us 4 calories per gram to work with. Lipids give us 9 calories per gram. So they have more than twice the amount of energy stored in a lipid in the same amount of weight. So energy storage is a big one. Insulation, they help keep our important body parts warm. Certain compounds have to be attached to sort of lipid substances to transport through the blood. And they are a major component of all of our cell membranes. So without lipids, we don't really have cells. The 3 types of lipids that are found in our food and in our body are triglycerides, which are fats, which we talked about. Phospholipids, which are kind of a modified triglyceride that is the primary component of things like our cell membranes. And sterols, which are cholesterol-based molecules, and their structure doesn't look anything like a triglyceride or a phospholipid. They have a very different structure, but they are considered lipids again because they are insoluble in water. They don't mix with water. The basic unit, the basic kind of building block that makes up most of a triglyceride and a phospholipid are substances called fatty acids. And here's kind of what a fatty acid looks like. It has this COOH group, which is what gives it the acidity to it, that little head there. And then it has a chain of carbons, just a long chain of carbons with hydrogens attached to it. And that is sort of that was what makes up the fatty acid. The carbon and hydrogen chains, we call those hydrocarbons. The hydrocarbon chain is various different lengths. So we'll have various different numbers of carbons and hydrogens attached to that tail, basically. But otherwise, general structure is the same. It's only carbon and hydrogen in that fatty acid chain. We have three types of fatty acids. One is the saturated fatty acid, which is what we just saw here. We can find an unsaturated fat by the presence of a double bond in between two or more of the carbons. So one of these hydrogens may be replaced with a double bond between two adjacent carbons. It might happen once in that chain, or it might happen, more than one time, 2 or 3 times between 2 or 3 different carbons. So if we see double bonds between the carbons in this, just specifically in this fatty acid chain, this chain down here, the hydrocarbon part, then we'll know that it is an unsaturated fatty acid. So this one is saturated because we have all single bonds between our carbons in that carbon chain. And when we say saturated, what that means is that we have all the hydrogens we could possibly have in this molecule. Like I said, if we have a double bond between carbons, it takes the place, that double bond takes the place of one of the hydrogens. So we'd be missing one or more hydrogens with an unsaturated fatty acid chain. So our unsaturated types are either monounsaturated, and we know the prefix mono means one, so that would be one double bond between carbons. An example of this is oleic acid. Oleic acid is 18 carbons long. It is what makes up most of the fatty acids in olive oil, and unsaturated fats, as a general rule, tend to be liquid at room temperature, so we call them oils. Saturated fats tend to be solid at room temperature, and then we call them, fats instead. So saturated fat, solid at room temperature, unsaturated fat, liquid at room temperature, or we also call it an oil instead of a fat. Polyunsaturated, or PUFAs, those have more than one double bond. So one of our essential essential fatty acids, linoleic acid and alpha linolenic acid, those guys are polyunsaturated fatty acids. And the reason we say that they are essential is that we need them in the body, and we cannot manufacture them on our own. So we must consume them somewhere in our diet. And they're essential precursors for a number of other things that we need structurally and functionally in the body. All right, so here we're looking at saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. The top one is the stearic acid, no double bond. So totally saturated with hydrogen, so it's our saturated fatty acid. The one below that, B, is oleic acid, which is a MUFA, or monounsaturated fatty acid. We can see the double bond there between the carbons kind of in the middle there. And then below that would be linoleic and alpha linolenic acid. Linoleic has 2 double bonds, and alpha linolenic acid has 3 double bonds in the carbon chain. And you'll notice structure-wise, what happens when we put those double bonds in is we get a kink in the tail, which is important because when those tails are kinked, they are more flexible and they are less likely to contribute to what we call atherosclerosis, which is where the fat sort of sticks into the walls of the arteries and stuff. So the heart healthy, better fats for you are going to be the mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids. So consuming more of those oils versus fats. The unsaturated fats tend to come from plant-based sources. These saturated fats tend to come from animal-based sources, although fish, especially cold water fish, are going to have a higher percentage of our unsaturated fatty acids that are, again, important for our health. So we fish and plants for the unsaturated fats, and then, the solid fats, the saturated fats are going to come from, red meat, more, even chicken, and dairy products and things like that. Okay, apologies for the pause there. Um, Oops, my screen popped up. There we go. Okay, so as far as the structure of a triglyceride, we're going to hit this fairly briefly. A triglyceride is a glycerol backbone. So it's sort of this three-carbon kind of alcohol-like molecule that has three fatty acid chains connected to it. So tri meaning three, glyceride referring to our glycerol backbone. It's the most common type of lipid found in our food and in our bodies, and we often refer to it as fat. Saturated fats, again, are going to be fats that have primarily saturated fatty acids associated with them, and then unsaturated fats are mostly unsaturated fatty acids associated with them. So like I said, oils tend to be the unsaturated fats that are liquid at room temperature, and they're liquid at room temperature because of those double bonds. Phospholipids are similar to a triglyceride in that they have the glycerol backbone, but they're only going to have two fatty acid chains attached to them. And the third one is kind of replaced by a phosphate group. So this, phosphate containing or phosphorus containing head group. And what we know about fats and lipids and all of that kind of stuff is that they are hydrophobic. And that is true of our fatty acid tails, but since one of these fatty acid tails is replaced by a phosphorus-containing head group, that phosphate group likes water. It's attracted to water, so we see it as hydrophilic. It has an affinity for water. It is attracted to water. And then again, still those fatty acid tails, those are hydrophobic as all get out. They have no interest in water. They will not mix with water. So when we put phospholipids into water, the head groups where the phosphate is located are going to be attracted to the water, and they're going to line themselves up facing any sort of watery environment. And the tails are going to want to be tucked away from a watery environment, and they make up, for the purpose of the cell membrane, we have what we call a phospholipid bilayer, which means that there's water in any cell and in any body. There's water inside the cell and there's water bathing the cell on the outside. So there's water on two sides. So what our phospholipids do is they line up in two rows. The outer row has the head facing the water outside the cell, and the inner row has the phosphate-containing head facing the water inside the cell. And then they tuck their little tails together in the center of the membrane to get them away from the water. So it's a perfect molecule to make up cell membranes. What we're looking at here is a phospholipid called lecithin, and it's one of the major phospholipids in our cell membranes, but it also is used in food like oil-based salad dressings, like an Italian dressing type thing, to keep the watery component and the oil from separating out from each other. So how that works is the lecithin, the phospholipid, the phosphate-containing head groups are attracted to the water, which would be in the watery component of the salad dressing, like the vinegar component, for example. And then it would wrap the lipids, the oil that it's used in the salad dressing, it would wrap that in a little bubble. So we have fat droplets in the center, and we have these phospholipids with the phosphate-containing head groups on the outside that are attracted to water. So it makes it stay together. It keeps the oil from separating out because the phosphate-containing head groups are attracted to water. So it'll take those little droplets and hold them in suspension or in the solution and acts as an emulsifier. All right, here is what I was talking about in terms of the phospholipid bilayer that makes up any cell membrane. The cell membrane's not just phospholipids. There's some cholesterol in there too, and there's quite a number of proteins that the proteins are kind of the functional components. They help us move substances across the membrane. They help us, help the cells respond to chemical messengers like hormones. They act as enzymes. They do any number of different activities. But as far as the lipid component, phospholipids are the most abundant lipid in there. All right. Our last group, the sterols, those don't have at all the same structure. So there's no glycerol backbone and fatty acid chain attached to it. But it is still hydrophobic. It doesn't like water. So we put it in the category of lipids or fats here. The example that we're looking at on the screen is cholesterol. And like I said, cholesterol has an important role in membrane structure, but it also is an important precursor for making vitamin D in our bodies. So we can convert cholesterol into vitamin D using ultraviolet radiation in our skin actually starts the process off, and then it moves through other organs and other organ systems in the body. Now, cholesterol itself is not a required component in our diet because our body is able to make all of the cholesterol we could possibly need from other precursors. So it's not required that we consume any cholesterol whatsoever in our diet. All right, so here's something that looks at the structures of each of those three types of lipids. As far as lipid digestion is concerned, digestion of lipid actually begins in the mouth a little bit. In our saliva, there is an enzyme called lingual lipase. Lingual refers to our tongue. So lingual lipase begins the digestion by sort of starting to strip off some of those fatty acids from the glycerol backbone when we're talking about triglycerides. It's going to continue digestion in the stomach. Gastric lipase breaks down fat into a diglyceride and one fatty acid. So in the stomach, we're going to pull off one whole chain, one whole fatty acid chain and turn it into a diglyceride. So a glycerol backbone with two fatty acids and one free fatty acid tail. So it's not very well digested by the time it reaches the small intestine. Once it reaches there, then we have a number of other number of other enzymes and other substances that are going to really help us break down those fatty acids and break down the triglycerides and so forth. So bile, for example, is produced in the liver, but it's stored in stored in the gallbladder. The gallbladder releases it after we eat a fatty meal, and it acts like an emulsifier. So we take the little globules of fat and wrap them in bile. Bile helps us to break them down into smaller bits. We wrap them in some phospholipid little containers that we call micelles, and then we're able to absorb them that way. So it's one of those things where we're not really able to digest things completely. We have to get them to be more water soluble to get them to go through the cells in the lining of the small intestine. And then depending on how big they are, they will go in a different direction. So the short chain fatty acids go through these cells that line the small intestine directly into the bloodstream and then travel to the liver. And then the longer chain fatty acids enter the lymph, so through our lymph vessels, and need to be attached to some protein carriers and then sent usually to the liver for processing and throughout the body there. So as far as transporting the fatty acids, the fat through the lymph and the blood, we need lipoproteins or lipoproteins. So the first type we have are the chylomicrons, and they basically are the kind of the protein component that carries the digestive fat through the lymph into the bloodstream. And then we have VLDLs, which we don't necessarily talk about too often, but VLDLs deliver fat that is made in the liver to our cells. And then we have our two other types of cholesterol that we talk about much more often. We have LDLs, low density lipoproteins, which we call the bad cholesterol. Um, and are ones that tend to contribute to atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease and things like that. So they tend to get kind of stuck in the walls of our arteries. Then we have our good cholesterol, which is HDL or high density lipoprotein. Um, what that does is the opposite of what LDL does. It takes the cholesterol, the excess cholesterol from the body, delivers it back to the liver so that the liver can get rid of it. So that's a good thing to get rid of the excess cholesterol so that we prevent it from kind of getting stuck in the walls of the arteries. When we talk about the density of our lipoproteins, we're talking about, the more protein there is in the molecule, the denser it becomes. So HDL has a much higher proportion of protein than either LDL or VLDL. And HDL has a lot more, because it has a lot more protein, it's more dense and it does not tend to get stuck in the walls of the arteries and contribute to atherosclerosis. So it's the healthy or the good cholesterol. And here you can see just sort of pie charts of the density of each of them and the different components. So chylomicrons are going to transport mostly triglycerides. VLDL are going to, again, carry mostly triglycerides, a little bit of phospholipid and so forth, but primarily triglycerides. It's only got 10% protein, so it's very low density, very fluffy and very low density. The LDL is going to transport primarily cholesterol, but a little bit of triglycerides and a little bit of phospholipids. And then it's only about 25% protein, so lower density still than our high density lipoprotein, which is going to have mostly protein, like 50% protein, and then 25% phospholipid, 20% cholesterol, and 5% triglycerides. And HDL, again, is going to grab the excess cholesterol and the excess fat and take it back to the liver so that we can get rid of it. We can process it and get it out of our bodies. Okay, so fat. What do we need fat for? Again, fat is very energy dense. It gives us 9 calories per gram, as opposed to protein and carbohydrates, which only give us 4 calories per gram. So it's a very dense source of fuel that we use when we are when we're fasting between meals. We can burn our fat to provide us with energy, and we can use those fats a little bit to make new glucose for the body as well. So, fats are an important energy source when we're fasting, when we're between meals. It keeps our energy levels up. We also need fat to absorb our fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, and then also carotenoids. And we will have a whole chapter on vitamins, so we'll talk more about those later. Insulation to help us maintain our body temperature, and as cushion for our bones, for our organs, and for our nerves. So we have fat that helps to protect and cushion, our organs and body parts. All right, let's talk a little bit about our two essential, two polyunsaturated fatty acids that are essential, meaning that our body cannot make them out of other precursors. We must have them in the diet. So they're both omega-3 fatty acids. They're polyunsaturated fats. Where the omega designation comes from is which carbon the double bond is attached to. So it's the third carbon in from the end of the tail is the first double bond you find in an omega-3. An omega-6 would have the first double bond between the 6th and 7th carbons. And omega-9 between the 9th and 10th carbons. So it just is, the omega designation is just where is that, at least the first double bond if there's more than one. What do we need them for? These two particular essential fatty acids to maintain our healthy skin and nerves and cell membranes. They're an important precursor to other molecules that we need for our body and our brain health and all of that kind of stuff. So we use them to make eicosanoids, which are hormone-like substances involved in inflammation, blood clotting, and blood pressure regulation. And then EPA and DHA, which are omega-3 fatty acids that are heart healthy. These EPA and DHA, we get them from fatty fish like salmon, herring, and sardines. Those are good sources of EPA and DHA, which are important, and again, nerve and skin and all of that kind of stuff, development and maintenance of those tissues. As far as cholesterol, how do we use cholesterol? It has a lot of important roles, as we said, precursor to vitamin D. It's an important component of our cell membranes. We need it to make our sex hormones. So estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are all steroid or sterol-based hormones that have cholesterol as their base. Without cholesterol, we don't have those, but we don't need to consume cholesterol in our diet because our body can manufacture enough cholesterol to make everything that it needs. So it's not an essential component of our diet. All right, how much fat do we need? Our recommendation for fat is between 20 and 35% of our total calories, but you know, fat has more than twice the calories per gram than either carbohydrate or protein. So, and again, not all fat is created equal. So, and again, for our heart health, especially, not all fat is created equal. So, you should consume less than 10%, or, ideally around 7% of our total calories from saturated fat. So, limiting our saturated fat is important for our heart health. And consuming of those calories that we do consume from fat, the majority of it should come from unsaturated fatty sources, or again, unsaturated fatty acids are better for us, for our heart health for sure, than saturated fat. So here's looking at a table to kind of maintain our weight. If you need this many calories to maintain your weight, this is the percentage you should have from fat, and then the range of calories from saturated fat specifically. So don't eat more than, this many grams of saturated fat. So it's, based on the number of calories that you would need to maintain your current weight. All right, I'm going to skip through this. This is not necessarily an essential part of the chapter here, so I'm going to kind of skip through that little math equation slide there. As far as our essential fatty acids, how much of those should we be getting? So between 5 and 10% of our total calories should come from linoleic acid, and then we need less of the alpha-linolenic acid, between 0.6 and 1.2%. So we'll look at a table here in just a little bit about where we could get those two essential fatty acids in just a moment. There's another type of fat that we haven't yet talked about, and it is trans fat in our diet. Trans fat is interesting because it's basically put into food because it kind of makes it increases the shelf life of food. It makes it oils and like natural fats can become rancid fairly quickly, but trans fats do not. And how they do that, and they're also fairly cheap to use, are by taking oils, which are cheaper to use than saturated fats, and we add hydrogen to them, and it creates this sort of I would say like a Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster of fats. So it takes something that would normally be an unsaturated fat, and it adds hydrogen to it. It hydrogenates it, and it creates these weird foreign double bonds that create this molecule that is really, really bad for us. It's really, really bad for our heart health, especially. So if you look at the food label and it says anything about like hydrogenated soybean oil or partially hydrogenated, canola oil or whatever, you probably want to put it back and try to pick something else, because trans fats are really bad for you. we don't even have a recommendation for like how much of that in a day is okay. Like just the less amount of that, the better. The less trans fat, the better in your diet. And if you can get zero trans fat in your diet, that's even better. So, saturated fat tends to be pretty bad for your cholesterol. Um, Trans fat is even worse because not only does trans fat raise your bad cholesterol, your LDL, it actually helps to lower your HDL, which is your good cholesterol. So it is bad. The FDA has banned partially hydrogenated oil in processed food. So that is good. There should be, very little of our partially hydrogenated oils and stuff anymore in our packaged foods. All right, again, there's no recommendation. We don't need to consume cholesterol because we can make enough as much as we need in that regard. So healthy individuals over the age of 2 are advised to limit your dietary cholesterol to less than 300 milligrams per day. So that's milligrams, not grams. That's 300 milligrams is a very small, it's 0.3 grams per day. So dietary cholesterol doesn't really, we've gone back and forth in the research on cholesterol over, the decades. And it used to be that, oh, cholesterol is bad. You should not have any cholesterol in your diet. It really leads to, a lot of your higher bad cholesterol levels and all of that kind of stuff. But the most recent research suggests that dietary cholesterol is less important and has less impact on your total LDL levels than saturated fat. So that's why we say limit saturated fat in your diet because it does increase your LDL. Don't consume trans fat because not only does it increase your LDL, it lowers your HDL. But if you have really, really high levels of dietary cholesterol, it can increase your blood cholesterol levels. So that's why we want to make sure that you try to pay attention to cholesterol as well and limit the amount of cholesterol that you eat. Because again, you don't really need cholesterol in your diet. All right. Major sources for saturated fat. This is something you can look through and if that's of interest to you. All right. So what are the best sources of fat? Anything that has a lot of unsaturated fat in it. So again, primarily plant-based sources. Unsaturated fats are abundant in vegetable oils, soybeans, walnuts, peanut butter, flaxseed, wheat germ. Vegetable oil, nuts, and flaxseed are also great sources for our essential fatty acids. So we want to get, again, more plant-based sources of fat than we do animal-based sources of fat. Animal-based sources of fat are much higher in saturated fat than plants are. And so this shows you for both linoleic and alpha-linolenic acid, some dietary sources, what we need, and what are good sources of those. Here is looking at other types of oils and fats. There's a bracket for the ones that are solid at room temperature, and that does include coconut oil and palm oil. So those are plant-based sources of fat that are higher in saturated fat than your traditional plant-based sources. The other thing with palm oil and all of that is that it is environmentally devastating. A lot of our, rainforests and stuff are slashed and burned in favor of planting things to harvest palm oil and palm kernel oil from. So not only is it bad for you, it's or not as good for you, it's worse for the environment. It's pretty bad and devastating for the environment. So stick to the right side of the graph as much as possible and go away from the stuff on the left side. We do make some fat substitutes, and I'm not going to like harp on the fat substitutes too much. The majority of them are carbohydrate based, and they use plant polysaccharides in order to make a fat substitute. So carbohydrate, protein, and some of them are actually fat based as well, but they're modified in a way to basically lower the number of calories that come from them. So here's what you might do, because what fat does for our food is it makes things flaky and it gives it a nice mouth feel and a smooth texture and all of that delicious stuff. Um, so if you want something to thicken or gel a food, you can use fibers from grains. Um, you know, and then it'll give you fewer calories, water retention, texture, mouth feel in your sauces and your frozen desserts, salad dressings and things like that. Cellulose is a good one. Um, again, so this is just ways of lowering the number of calories that you're getting and lowering the amount of fat that you're eating in your diet is by potentially using some of these modified fat substitutes here. So there's a couple pages of those that you can kind of look through. One of them I did want to talk about are mono and diglycerides. Those are instead of a triglyceride with 3 fatty acids, a monoglyceride would have the glycerol backbone and 1 fatty acid. Diglyceride, you might be able to guess, would be the glycerol backbone and 2 fatty acid tails. Those still provide 9 kilocalories per gram, but you use less of this product to create the same effect. So you might use that in baking. So it still has 9 calories per gram, but you might be able to cut the amount of fat that you're using in half to get the same effect. All right. So we've been talking a little bit about heart disease, about atherosclerosis, and about, saturated fats and cholesterol and so forth. Um, so heart disease begins usually with buildup of plaque in the arteries, which is a process called atherosclerosis. So, and that's specifically in the coronary arteries that feed our heart with blood. And if our heart, can't get blood, then our cardiac muscle dies and we have what we call a heart attack. And then the nice contractile cardiac muscle in the wall of the heart uh, is going to die, and we're going to replace it with scar tissue, which is not contractile, and your heart stops functioning as well as it did prior to this heart attack. So atherosclerosis is bad. Plaquing in the walls of any artery is bad, but it's worse when well, I wouldn't say worse, but it's concerning when it involves the coronary arteries. We think what happens is someone, maybe develops high blood pressure or high cholesterol levels, or they smoke, which causes damage to the walls of the arteries. And when the walls of the arteries are damaged, then you start getting blood clots in there. So blood maybe will stick to it. And the other thing that sticks to it is that, stuff like LDL, bad cholesterol, and all of that kind of stuff. The more LDL you have in your blood, the more of it sticks to those injured areas of the artery, and the narrower and narrower the artery becomes, causing a loss of blood flow. And if it's to the heart, we call that a heart attack. And if it's to the brain, we call that a stroke. So here's what that looks like. We get that sort of injury to the wall of the artery, and then all that fatty junk starts to collect there. And you can see it causes this plaque formation, and the plaque narrows the opening in the blood vessel. So you can see at the top is a normal, healthy blood vessel artery cross section. On the bottom, you can see it's cut basically in half by this plaque in the wall of the artery. So you can see how that would limit blood flow to an organ and cause, a heart attack or a stroke. All right. So what are the risk factors for heart disease? Some of them we can control, some of them we can't control. Factors that you cannot control are your age and your sex. So your genetic sex, your age. The older we get, the more likely we are to have heart disease. Sex, males are more likely to have heart disease than females. Family history of heart disease. There is a potential genetic predisposition or genetic component to it. So if you have a lot of family members like I do who have died from strokes and heart attacks and things like that, that's a risk factor I can't control. And then type 1 diabetes as well. Diabetes tends to cause damage to smaller blood vessels, including the vessels to the heart. So if you have type 1 diabetes, there's nothing you can do about that. It is an autoimmune disease, and that is not something you can control. But factors that are in your control that contribute to heart disease having type 2 diabetes, which is again the insulin resistant type of diabetes, having high blood pressure, smoking, being physically inactive, being excessively overweight, having low HDL and high LDL. Um, those are all things that you can do something about. You can become more physically active. You can quit smoking. You can work on your diet and your exercise, lose weight. You can lower your blood pressure with exercise and a healthier diet. You can take medications to lower your blood pressure, which puts less strain on your arteries and on your blood vessels. So hopefully less injury to the blood vessels, leading to less of that plaquing occurring. So a lot of this stuff is under your control. There's a lot you can do to minimize risk for heart disease and heart attacks and strokes. All right, so in general, what are we going to do to maintain our heart health and our healthy levels of blood cholesterol? Number one is minimize the saturated fats, the trans fats, and the cholesterol in the diet. Include fish in your weekly food choices. So if you're a meat eater, I am not, but if you're a meat eater, you can replace red meat with fish at least once a week to help minimize your saturated fat and increase your healthy unsaturated fats. You want to eat a plant-based, primarily plant-based diet where you're going to include lots of different types of plants and all of that in the diet, because not only does that limit the amount of fat that you're eating, it also increases your fiber, which slows down your fat intake, or it moves things along through your digestive tract to prevent a lot of fat absorption. You want to get foods rich in antioxidants and phytochemicals that are going to help maintain, your cells and health of your cells and all of that. Again, plenty of exercise, at least 30 minutes every day of exercise to manage your weight. Moderate use of alcohol lowers the risk of heart disease. But if you have certain risk factors for substance use disorder, or you're pregnant or have some other contraindication, you take a medication that doesn't allow you to consume any alcohol at all, you should just totally avoid alcohol. So moderate being like one drink a day, basically, would be moderate use of alcohol. And doing all of those things goes a long way to improving your health and lowering your risk of heart disease. Here we can look at three different food labels here. One of them is for butter. The second one is for margarine. The third one is for a liquid fat, like a cooking oil. So you're looking at kind of a comparison there of the three products. The butter itself, this is for a tablespoon of each of these. A tablespoon of butter has 11 total grams of fat, but it has 7 grams of saturated fat and 30 milligrams of cholesterol. So the 30 milligrams of cholesterol is not terrible. Looking at the margarine, the second one, we have, again, 11 total grams of fat, a little bit lower with 5 grams of saturated fat. And then we have a lot more unsaturated fat. We have 3 grams of poly and 3 grams of mono unsaturated fat. So that is excellent. The unsaturated fat components of the margarine are a little bit better. When we look at the oil here, it's a little bit higher in total fat, so 14 grams of total fat here. However, there's only 2 grams of saturated fat, 2 grams of poly, and 10 grams of mono unsaturated fats. So still the oil maybe is slightly higher in calories and slightly higher in total fat, but it provides you with the heart healthy versions of those fats. So you want to make sure you're paying attention to your total calorie intake, but consuming the oil would be better for your heart than consuming either the margarine or the butter. All right. As far as cholesterol levels, what should your cholesterol be if you go into the doctor and have your cholesterol checked? To have your cholesterol checked, they do a little blood draw, and you have to be fasting for usually about 12 hours or so before they take the blood. So if your total cholesterol is less than 200, awesome. 200 to 239, a little bit high, a little borderline, a little concerning. And it's high if it's 240 or above. And then they break, that's total cholesterol. So that's HDL plus LDL. With LDL, you want to be under 100 milligrams per deciliter of, milligrams per deciliter for your LDL cholesterol. So under 100 is the best. And your HDL, as high as you can get it, but greater than or equal to 60 is a good number. Between 40 and 60 is okay. Less than 40 is too low. So you want to be above 60 for HDL, and you want to be less than 100 for LDL, and less than 200 total. All right. One of our most studied and best, healthiest types of diets is called the Mediterranean diet. It is obviously, it originated in kind of the Mediterranean Sea area, so like Greece and places like that. And it has a much lower, those people have much lower risk of heart disease and certain types of cancer as well. So the Mediterranean diet is not just what you eat, but it also has to do a little bit with your activities and your stress levels and so forth. So very active lifestyle. They have long, relaxing family meals where you don't just sit down and chow down and have your whole meal finished in 10 minutes. They often take afternoon naps. They have little siestas, and they have a supportive community environment where everyone helps everyone else. So it's a little bit different than the life we lead in this country, but there are some things that we can do to maybe mimic this and lower our risk of heart disease and cancer. So basically, the Mediterranean diet is a plant-based whole foods diet. Plant-based diet of whole grains, fruits, and veggies, legumes, and nuts are going to be the primary components of the diet. Olive oil, low-fat dairy, and water. And then we mix in occasional things like meat, eggs, poultry, sweets, and wine. So it is primarily plant-based whole foods type of diet. Fat coming from olive oil and low-fat dairy, and water, a lot of water. So that is kind of the ideal healthy diet for longevity, for lowering risk of heart disease, lowering risk of cancer, but the other component being more physically active, but also stress management, relaxing long family meals, taking naps, supporting your community, being kind to one another, limiting our stressors in our lives also is a component of this lifestyle as well. So here's the Mediterranean diet as far as, the pyramid of what we eat. Again, on the bottom, we have the base of lots of plant-based whole foods, a little bit of olive oil, lots of, nuts and legumes and fruits and veggies. And, the base of every meal is not meat and potatoes. It is all of this rainbow of beautiful, healthy fruits and veggies and grains. Twice a week, we're going to have some seafood. At least twice a week, we'll have a little bit of seafood for probably one meal. Eat moderate proportions of things like yogurt and cheese and eggs and that kind of stuff. With our sweets and our red meats, that's usually maybe once a month. That they would consume a small amount of red meat or sweets in their diet. Drink lots of water, a little bit of wine in moderation. So have fun, be active, spend time with your family. Don't chow down your food in 10 minutes. Sit and talk and eat and enjoy each other's company and, help out your community. And those are great ways to aid in your health and in the health of your community. All right. Plant-based foods are high in soluble fiber. One of the best ways to decrease your LDL because it limits the absorption of LDL or of lipids in general. Plant foods are cholesterol-free, but they do have what are called phytosterols or plant sterols that are similar to cholesterol, but they can also help lower LDL by competing with cholesterol for absorption. So that's important there. And they don't really contribute to our own cholesterol levels in our blood. So plant sterols are good for you. Where can you get those? Soybean oil, a lot of fruits and veggies, legumes, sesame seeds, nuts, cereal. Lots of plant-based foods are going to have these phytosterols that help lower our LDL. You want to have foods that are high in antioxidants. Those are again going to be things like fruits and veggies and whole grains are going to have those um, important antioxidants that help our cells become better functioning and get rid of free radical damage to our cells and our tissues and our DNA. Um, so again, a lot of plant-based foods, having a variety of colors and types and varieties of fruits and veggies will help, again, your overall health. All right, good sources of omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3s, again, are heart healthy, really good for you. A lot of fish, a lot of seafood. Again, components that you have in the Mediterranean diet, usually a couple of times a week, you're going to have a seafood source there. So important sources of healthy heart, healthy fats. All right. So decrease LDL cholesterol, less saturated fat, little to no trans fat, less dietary cholesterol, more soluble fiber, more plant-based diet, and then lifestyle, exercise more and lose excess weight. All right, that ends our chapter on lipids. So remember, for the week, we're going to have our discussion board, which deals a little bit with the Mediterranean diet and some questions related to that. We are going to have our normal Chapter 5 homework assignment, and we will also have the first unit exam. So make sure that you are paying attention to the study guide for the Unit 1 exam and that you get that completed. Everything you need for the week should be found in the chapter, in the week 5 folder. And then remember, for next week, the end of the week, next week, the project on going out to eat or making a recipe at home is going to be due by the end of next week, and that will be found in the week 6 folder when the week 6 folder opens up next Monday. All right, have a great week, and if you need anything, let me know.